Welcome to Carrickfergus Vineyard, a place of hope where lives are changing. We're a church in the heart of Carrickfergus, passionate about seeing people's lives changed by the love of Jesus. The following message was given at one of our Sunday services.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is so good to be with you this morning. If we haven't met before, my name is Hannah. I'm part of the wonderful youth team here at Carrick Vineyard. And Carrick is also home, even though I'm not here all the time. And as Paul said this morning, we're jumping back into our series on Mark. Hopefully by now it's feels like it should be the end of January. It's really mid-January. But we're kind of adjusting back to our routines and rhythms, and we're doing the same here in church. And if you remember way back at the end of November, Chantal spoke on Mark 10 and did a brilliant talk on divorce. And so this morning we're going to be continuing. But if you're already in Mark 11, you can actually go back a few pages, because today we're in Mark 9 and 10, which might upset some of you, but just think of it as like the director's cut. Like, these passages are so good that we don't want to skip over them, but we're going to go back and look at them. And so we're just going to jump straight in because there's a lot to cover. So if you want to open up your Bibles or Mark notebooks to chapter 9, and we're in verse 30. It says, "They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise.' But they did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it." And so for context, Jesus and his disciples are journeying from Galilee to Jerusalem, and they're headed towards this place because it's where Jesus has spoke about his destiny, that the place he is going to go to the cross. He predicts his death, which is the ultimate act of service. And for the disciples, this is not the first time that they have heard Jesus speak about this. It's actually the second, and it says that they still did not understand. It's like, have you ever been told the truth before? You know it's true because it's the truth, but you don't quite get it. Maybe in school it was a maths equation or physics, or for me it was when I found out that pterodactyl is spelled with a P when I was 18. And it's true, but they just couldn't wrap their heads around it. And so this is what I imagine the disciples feel, making eye contact with each other and muttering like, what is he on about? He's meant to be the Messiah. But unfortunately they were afraid to ask. But it wasn't due to restricted access. They were right there with him, with Jesus. It was fear. Was it the fear of sounding silly, or the fear of the unknown, or fear of the future? But either way, they missed out on understanding. They had an opportunity for revelation and knowledge, but they let fear get in the way. But the journey continues. In verse 33 to 37, it says, "They came to Capernaum, where he was in the house, and he asked them, 'What were you arguing about on the road?' But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, 'Anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and servant of all.' He took a little child whom he placed among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me.'" And so while they've been on this journey, the disciples have been having this dispute among them about who is the greatest. While Jesus is literally on the way on the cross, showing that he is self-giving and going in this like downward movement, the disciples are in the opposite direction, arguing about status, recognition, and wanting this upward movement. And so when they arrive, I imagine that the conversation is probably dried up, and it's then that Jesus asks them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" And they kept quiet. I think it's because they knew it was nothing worth arguing about. It was this embarrassed silence. They were marked by a healthy amount of shame that showed that the message that Jesus had been teaching this whole time was shrinking in their hearts. And Jesus sits, he takes this posture of teaching, which rabbis did in that time. And in answering the question, he didn't put the focus on himself and giving the obvious right answer that I'm the greatest. But he says that anyone who wants to be first must be last and servant of all. And when I thought about this, there is nothing glamorous about being last. Imagine a marathon and you're one of the last. There's the sweeper van before you. The crowds have probably gone or long gone. There's no water left at the water stations. And while the Portaloos, many people have gone before you. It's not pretty. Last is not glamorous. And here Jesus is describing himself and his nature. He's really saying, even though I am the greatest, I am choosing to make myself last. And he is redefining greatness. What he's saying, counter to their culture, experience, and own ideas, is that Greatness is not about who is the most successful or most liked or highest up on the social ladder. It's being like him, serving like he does. It's about embracing last as a choice and allowing others to go before us. In ancient China, fun fact, it was fashionable for wealthy men to grow their fingernails as long as possible so that their hands were unsuitable for basic tasks. Like, the longer the fingernails, the less you could do, the greater you were, because it demonstrated that there was always a servant at hand to do anything and everything for you. But this is not what Jesus was teaching. Jesus declared that true greatness is shown not by how many serve you, but how many you serve. And in verse 36 and 37, Jesus takes a child to draw their attention to his nature and using it as an example. The child wasn't just a cute prop for his teaching, but in this context of culture, children had no status, no rights, and no voice. This wasn't a symbol of innocence, rather one of powerlessness and weakness. Children couldn't earn anything, they just received. To welcome a child was to welcome someone who could give nothing back in return. Isn't that interesting? The way of serving is one that expects nothing in return. It's to serve freely with no strings attached. And if you want to flip over to Mark 10, we're going to go to the next passage in verse 32. And if you're getting deja vu, it's okay. So they were on their way up to Jerusalem with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. "We are going to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." So again, they're on the road, and again, Jesus is saying the same thing to his disciples. But I think it's important here to note the courage of Jesus. He knows what he's walking into, and yet he walks straight towards it and in front of the others. And again, like that passage before in Mark 9, the disciples are afraid, and those who followed were afraid. The disciples sensed danger. Jesus was a wanted man, and yet he was the one who was going before them. But this time, the disciples, instead of in fear choosing silence, they chose courage, because courage is not the absence of fear, but faithfulness in it. And they chose obedience to Jesus despite not fully understanding, while being afraid. And I just think that's so encouraging for us, that we might not fully understand, and we might be a bit afraid also of our future, our circumstances, world politics, or whatever it might be. But there's a God who walks with us right in the midst of our stuff and goes before us, because he knows how the story ends, so we can follow him despite our feelings. And once again, Jesus is telling those who follow him about what's ahead, his suffering and his death. Probably not what the scared disciples wanted to hear, but what Jesus was actually doing was bringing them comfort. Because when he spoke of his death, he always spoke of his resurrection. Because where death and Jesus are, resurrection is inevitable. And for us, that's good news, that the end of the story is not death, but there is resurrection and life. And as they journey on this road, in verse 35, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. And Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or at my left is not for me to grant. Those places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." And when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who you regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for a ransom as many." And I think it's interesting in this story that maybe James and John felt so confident of their greatness to ask this question, because earlier on in Mark 9, they had been with Jesus in the Transfiguration, a pretty astonishing event where the other disciples weren't. And even though they asked Jesus this, and Jesus probably knew what was coming, he still asked them, what do you want me to do for you? Because he cared about their desires, because he cares about our desires. We probably all know a person in our life who has just no filter. And before you know it, the sentence is out of their mouth and you're just like cringing there going, oh no, you did not just say that. And that's how I imagine the other disciples as James and John have so confidently asked what they asked. And their desire of position and status showed that they didn't quite get it. They didn't know and understand the true nature of Jesus yet. They were trying to protect a position, and they were asking Jesus to serve their vision of position and power that they had in their heads. They were looking for this worldly power, which lies in control, visibility, and titles, when really kingdom power is all about hiddenness, cost, and faithfulness. John Tyson, a pastor of Church of the City in New York, says, faithfulness to Jesus often looks like obscurity, surrender, and service rather than visibility and success. You see, Jesus and the church doesn't operate in the way that the world does, and success is not the calling over our lives. Again, Eugene Peterson puts it like this: we are not called to be successful, but to be faithful, and faithfulness usually looks like service. Real ministry is done for the benefit of the one being ministered to and not for the minister himself. And we see that all over Jesus' life and in the Gospels. And what stuck out to me in this passage is that I don't think it's a coincidence that this teaching on serving is also given on the road to death. It's not abstract, it's spoken on this path because this is what it's like to serve. To serve is to die to yourself and your desires. It's death to me, my time, my energy, my wants. It's denying yourself, picking up your cross, and following him in his ways. And in doing so, it realigns us. It takes our focus off of ourselves. It's really hard to think about what clothes am I going to buy when you're actually clothing someone who has nothing. And there's a shift, first in our perspective, and then our attitude as we increase in gratitude. And when we serve, I believe we see more like Jesus sees and become more like who he is. And the desire that James and John had in this passage to be praised and to gain recognition, I think should be foreign to a follower of Jesus, because when did Jesus go seeking praise? He often told the people he had just healed or had seen miraculous, like, don't tell anyone. He didn't chase the applause, and when praise did come, he redirected it right to the right place, to the Father, to God. Earlier on in Mark 10, in verse 18, when he was called a good teacher, Jesus replies, why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. He steers the attention away from himself, and he specifically warned the disciples against this type of pride of what the religious leaders who love the place of honor and public admiration. Jesus didn't climb the ladder of success, but he carried a cross, and he invited us to follow him and follow his ways. And I think they had a point, because praises from man are nice, right? They're instant, but they're also temporary, and gratification fades. Meanwhile, praise from God, that lies in eternity. It doesn't come from striving, but it comes from the secret place, the things that people don't see. It's not the 5 minutes that you have on the platform, but it's the hours and the days spent at his feet, storing up treasure in heaven. It's abiding in him, to serve him through his children as we wait patiently and expectantly to see the fullness of the reward. And Jesus tells them in verse 38 plainly, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink from my cup? And they answer confidently, we can. But Jesus says, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. And this was a baptism of suffering and not status, which later James and John actually did then face a great deal of suffering, as they were among one of the first disciples to be martyred. They wanted the crown, and Jesus offered them a cup. They wanted resurrection without crucifixion, glory without suffering. They just wanted to jump to the top, to skip to the good place. And is it okay to want good things? Of course, they have their place, and God isn't afraid of our desires. He just wants to be greater than them. And perhaps James and John weren't looking for something. Perhaps they were looking for something greater and deeper than success. Perhaps they were longing for significance, to sit with Jesus in the highest places, to feel important. That sounds familiar. Who doesn't want to be important and significant? To feel seen, loved, known, and valued. But they had it right there. They were walking with Jesus. They were rooted in community, and they were serving towns, but they just had this other idea of what it would look like. And the truth is that we are already significant. In Peter chapter 2, verse 9, it says, "But you are a chosen priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you might declare the praise of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." A chosen priesthood. That sounds pretty significant to me. And so from that place of being rooted in love and chosen by God, we get to choose others. We get to show them a piece of the Father's heart. Because God has gone before you and me. He has already chosen us and given us significance so that we don't have to work for it, but we can give away what we've already been given. We love because he loved us first, and he also served us first. And in verse 43 then, Jesus finishes with, "Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all." Again, like Jesus has already taught and said many a time, he's repeating himself, that the first will be last, the last will be first. His way, this way, is radical, and so the kingdom, it's because his kingdom is backwards and it flows in reverse. It's totally upside down. And he had reason to repeat his teaching because they didn't quite grasp it. If all you've known is striving, climbing, fighting to get to the top, it's going to sound rare. And Jesus is saying the opposite. He wasn't necessarily saying, listen up, there's a new ranking system. Rather, he's saying there's no such thing. It's not about being forced to be last. It's preference. It's choosing others first and before ourselves. And choosing others doesn't only come through marriage or the people you like, but it's a way of life that liberates us from selfishness and self-obsession, so we can put friends, strangers, and family alike ahead of ourselves. Because serving, as Jesus says here, isn't just a practice or something we do, but it's who we are. We're servants. And not any old servants, but servants of his kingdom. And here's the bonus. When we serve, we don't just serve the person in front of us. Matthew 25, in verses 35 and 40 says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was ill and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And in Ephesians 6, verse 7, it confirms the attitude that we are to have when serving. It says, "Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people." When we perceive the preeminence of his position, no one else's power matters. And when we fix our eyes on him as first place, everything else comes into order. We're no longer focused on what we're doing, but rather who we are doing it for. And through that person or ministry, we get to serve the King of Kings. And this King is really worthy. He's worthy of the best melodies, the warmest welcome, a great cup of coffee, an organised spreadsheet, a brilliant youth programme, or a tasty dinner delivered. Whatever it may be, he's worthy of our best. And Jesus did a great job of giving us an example of how to serve well and to give our best. He paved the way for us. Verse 45, he didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. This was his mission statement, a model, and a theology for leadership. In Mark 9 and 10, Jesus is revealed as a servant king. He showed us that it is possible to carry both power and humility, authority and submission, honor and sacrifice. He showed us that there is no deserving in serving, and we don't find significance by being seen by the world, applauded and praised, but by loving well in places that no one notices. And we can defer ourselves to be last because we know that we are loved, significant, and chosen first.
Thanks for listening to the Carrickfergus Vineyard podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our church, please visit our website, carrickfergusvineyard.org.